Hello and welcome to the Sacred Truth channel. Today I want to take you into a reflection that goes beyond what is normally discussed. A reflection that enters a deep, almost silent territory, but one that is extremely powerful. Because the question we are exploring today is not just curiosity, it is revelation. What did God say to Lucifer before his fall? Was there a warning, a confrontation, a final moment of decision? Or did the fall begin long before any words were spoken? Before we continue, I want to ask you something important. Subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell. Because this kind of content is not for those who only want to listen. It is for those who are willing to understand. And while you watch, don't just listen, reflect. Because this story is not just about Lucifer. It is about choices. And perhaps without realizing it, it is also about you. There is a very common idea that Lucifer's fall happened suddenly, as if it were an isolated event, a single moment where everything simply collapsed. But when you begin to look deeper, you realize that spiritual falls rarely happen overnight. They begin silently, almost imperceptibly, within the mind, within the heart, within the way someone begins to see themselves. And this is exactly where everything starts to change, because before Lucifer fell, he was exalted. Before he rebelled, he was close. Before he became known for the fall, he was known for his position. And this is extremely important to understand, because it shows that the greatest danger is not starting badly. It is losing yourself while still being in a high place. Lucifer did not fall because he lacked access to God. He fell because of the way he began to see himself before God. And this completely changes the narrative, because many people think that distance from God is the greatest risk. But in truth, the greatest risk can be closeness without humility. It is being near, but beginning to see yourself as equal. It is having access, but losing alignment. And it is exactly at this point that a question begins to arise. Did God simply allow the fall, or was there a moment of confrontation? Now we need to understand something essential. God is not a God of surprise in a human sense. He does not react. He knows. He sees before, understands before, perceives before. This means that nothing that happened with Lucifer was unexpected from a divine perspective. And if God saw it, then there was also a moment of response. But this response was not only external, it was internal. Because before any visible fall, there is an invisible decision. And perhaps this was the true dialogue, not necessarily in audible words, but in positioning, in awareness, in choice. Because God does not force obedience, He allows decision. And this is what makes everything more serious. Because Lucifer was not expelled without first having the opportunity to remain. And this reveals something profound. Every fall is preceded by a choice. Now let's go even deeper. The Bible gives us clues about what happened inside Lucifer before his fall. In texts such as Isaiah and Ezekiel, we see something that goes beyond simple disobedience. We see an internal process, a growth of something that at first may not have seemed so dangerous, but eventually became destructive. Pride, but not simple pride. A silent pride, a progressive pride, a pride that began with admiration and ended in self-exaltation. And this is extremely dangerous, because pride does not arrive saying, "I will destroy you." It arrives saying, "You deserve more." It does not begin as rebellion. It begins as comparison. And perhaps this is exactly where it all started. Lucifer, instead of remaining aligned with his position, began to look upward, not with reverence but with a desire for equality. He began to desire not only to be close to God, but to occupy the place of God. And here is the most critical point of all. When identity is lost, the fall approaches. Because Lucifer stopped seeing himself as a creature and began to see himself as the center. And when that happens, disconnection has already begun, even if externally nothing has changed yet. Now think about this carefully. How many times does a fall begin long before any visible mistake? How many times does everything seem normal on the outside, but inside something is already out of place? And this is exactly why this story is not just about Lucifer. It is about anyone who at some point faces the same kind of decision: to remain aligned or to exalt oneself, to stay in truth or to build a personal reality. And perhaps it is exactly at this moment that what we can call the voice of God enters. Not necessarily a conversation as we imagine, but a clear awareness, a call, a warning, a direction, because God always speaks even when we do not hear. And here is something deep. Before any fall, God already showed the path to remain. But remaining requires humility. It requires submission. It requires recognition of position. And this is exactly what pride rejects. Now imagine that moment. A being with access, beauty, position, influence being confronted not externally, but internally, with a choice that would define everything: to continue serving or to begin exalting himself. And perhaps this was the final conversation, not in the form of words, but in the form of decision. Because in the end, it was not God who changed. It was Lucifer who chose to step out of alignment. And this leads us to a truth that few want to face. God does not push anyone into a fall, but he also does not stop those who choose to walk away. And this makes everything even more serious, because it shows that free will is not just a gift, it is a responsibility. And perhaps at this moment, you are beginning to realize something. This story is not distant. It is not only spiritual. It is not only symbolic. It is practical. It happens every day. In small decisions, in silent thoughts, in internal choices that no one sees. Because every time someone exchanges humility for pride, alignment for ego, dependence for self-exaltation, the same process is repeated. And that is exactly why this question matters so much. What did God say to Lucifer before his fall? Perhaps the answer is not in specific words, but in something much deeper. God showed the path, but Lucifer chose another, and that changes everything. Now, after understanding that Lucifer's fall did not begin at the moment of expulsion, but much earlier, within an internal decision, we need to go even deeper, the moment when what was hidden became visible, because there is a difference between internal process and external manifestation. And at some point, what was being nurtured in silence inside Lucifer stopped being just thought and became positioning. And this is exactly where everything intensifies. Because while something is still only in the mind, there is still space for correction. There is still time for adjustment. There is still opportunity to return. But when it becomes a decision, when it becomes action, the path begins to define itself irreversibly. And this is what many do not understand. The fall does not happen when you make the first mistake. It happens when you decide to sustain the mistake as truth. And perhaps this is exactly what happened. Lucifer did not only think about exalting himself, he began to believe it. He did not only consider the possibility, he began to position himself according to it. And this changes everything, because beliefs shape actions, and actions build destiny. Now imagine the level of this moment. We are not talking about someone ordinary. We are talking about a being with influence, authority, and access. And when someone like that changes internally, it does not only affect themselves, it affects everything around them. And this is exactly why Lucifer's fall was not isolated. It pulled others with it. And this reveals something extremely serious. When someone in a position becomes misaligned, the impact is never individual. It always expands, because influence multiplies decisions. And this leads us to a truth many avoid accepting. One wrong choice does not only affect you, it can affect everyone connected to you. And perhaps this is why the process is so strict. Because the greater the impact, the greater the responsibility. Now let's go into something even more intense. The moment of the fall was not just a physical event, it was a spiritual collapse. Because when someone decides to place themselves above what they should honor, the internal structure cannot sustain it. And this inevitably leads to rupture. Lucifer tried to occupy a place that was not created for him, and in doing so, completely broke the alignment that kept him in position. And here is the point that changes everything. Position without alignment cannot hold. You may reach something. You may rise, but if you are not aligned with truth, eventually everything collapses. And this is not punishment. It is consequence. Because the spiritual universe works with principles. And when those principles are broken, the structure responds. Now perhaps you're asking, where is God in this moment? If God saw everything, why did he allow it to reach that point? And this is one of the deepest questions of all, because it leads us to understand something essential. God does not force permanence. He offers the path but allows choice. And this is what makes everything real. Because obedience without choice is not obedience, it is imposition. And God does not seek imposition, he seeks voluntary alignment. And Lucifer had that opportunity. But he chose another path, and when that choice was fully established, the consequence became inevitable. Now think about this carefully. How many times do people expect God to prevent a fall when in reality, he has already shown the way to avoid it? How many times does someone ignore signs, ignore direction, ignore conscience, and later wonder why everything collapsed? And this is exactly what this story reveals. God does not need to say, "Do not do this," repeatedly, because he has already established clear principles. And when someone chooses to go against those principles, the result is already defined. But here comes something even deeper. Lucifer's fall was not only a loss of position, it was a loss of identity, because by moving away from truth, he lost what correctly defined him. And this is extremely serious, because when someone loses identity, they begin to live based on distortion. And distortion leads to destruction. And perhaps this is why after the fall there is no record of true repentance. Because when pride reaches a certain level, it prevents even the recognition of error. And this is the most dangerous point of all. It is not falling. It is not wanting to return. Now let's connect this with something practical. How many people today are going through the same process? They start with small distortions, small deviations, small misaligned decisions, and instead of correcting them, they begin to justify them. They begin to build a narrative to sustain what they know is not right. And over time, this becomes a new truth, but it is not truth. It is only a construction based on ego, and this inevitably leads to the fall. But here is something that completely changes the perspective. Lucifer's fall was not only about him, it was a warning. An extreme example of something that happens in smaller scales every day. Because every time someone chooses to place themselves above truth, every time someone rejects correction, every time someone exchanges alignment for pride, the same pattern is being repeated. And this leads us to an inevitable question. If you were in that moment, what decision would you make? Would you remain, or would you begin to exalt yourself? And this question is not theoretical. It is practical, because this decision happens every day. In small things, in silent thoughts, in actions no one sees. And perhaps at this moment, you're beginning to realize something even deeper. The fall does not begin when everything collapses. It begins when you stop listening, when you ignore what you already know, when you choose yourself above what is right. And that is exactly what led Lucifer to the point of no return. After all this process we analyzed, from what began as an internal decision to the moment it became an irreversible position, what we must truly understand is that Lucifer's fall was not just an isolated event in the past, but the manifestation of an eternal principle that remains active wherever there is choice, awareness, and responsibility. Because the deepest point of this story was never the fall itself, but what led to it and what it reveals about the functioning of everything that depends on alignment. And when we look at it carefully, we realize that the fall does not end at the moment someone is removed from a position or loses what they had, because the true impact happens afterward, when consequences begin to expand and reorganize everything around them. Nothing remains the same after a rupture of this level, because when there is a break in alignment, it is not only the place that changes, it is the very nature of what sustained that place that no longer exists in the same way. And here it becomes even deeper, because this story is not only about a being and his fall, but about a principle that continues to repeat itself across different scales. Whenever a decision is made against the truth that is known, whenever pride begins to replace the humility of listening and correcting, and whenever someone chooses to sustain what they already know is misaligned, the same pattern begins silently to form, even if invisibly at first, but inevitably in its outcome, because the fall is rarely instantaneous. It is almost always the result of a silent process that is gradually fed until it becomes irreversible. And the most dangerous part of it all is that during this process, perception is altered, awareness is reshaped, and what was once clear begins to seem justifiable, until there is no longer emotional or spiritual return to the original point. And perhaps this is why this story is so impactful, because it is not only speaking about something that happened, it is exposing something that can happen at any level of consciousness. The difference between remaining and falling has never been only strength or ability, but the willingness to remain aligned even when there is an option to deviate, even when there is space to justify error, and even when no one is watching the internal decisions being made in silence. And when we reach this point, everything comes down to a truth that is extremely simple, but deeply uncomfortable. It is not the moment of the fall that defines destiny. It is the sequence of small choices that lead to it. And this means that what seems small today may be exactly what determines the structure of tomorrow, because no aligned or misaligned decision remains isolated in time. And that is why this story continues to be a warning, not as something distant or symbolic only, but as a direct mirror of processes that happen every day within the mind, the heart, and the choices of anyone who still has awareness of what is right, but who is constantly faced with the decision to follow or ignore what they already know. And now, at the end of everything, the question is no longer about Lucifer, but about each one of us. Because at some level we have all been in that place of decision, where the truth was already clear, but still there was temptation to choose another path. And it is exactly in that silent point that destiny begins to be shaped, long before any consequence becomes visible. Because in the end, it is not about falling. It is about what you choose to sustain before any fall ever happens.